we're going to start the second chapter, which instructs you or gives you a methodology to analyze the business processes. And this methodology is called BPMN, Business Process Modeling Notation. So later on, we will learn what that is and how we can use a platform to draw your own BPMN diagram. Okay, so that's about the second chapter. So first, let's do a little bit of review of our previous week. So last Wednesday, we talked about what is accounting information system, right? And we say that AIS is basically an information system that has the capability to record, to process, and to report both non-financial and financial information to support business decision making, right? And also firms, large and small, they are investing in different kinds of AIS systems. So here a little bit of a test. So we say that there are different types of AIS systems. So we say that there are systems that manage internal business processes versus those that focuses on external business processes. So what do we call the type of AIS that deals with internal business processes? What type of AIS? We have a name, relationship management, right? That is a type of AIS that deals with relationships with external customers. And we also have supply chain management system, right? So that's another major type of AIS system. And we also talk about that if we have a very well-designed AIS system, then we expect the business process to be more efficient and effective. Okay. And last time, we also did a lot of discussion on the changing roles of accountants in today's business world. So besides the traditional tasks that accountants perform, such as doing financial reporting and taking on managerial accounting tasks, now accountants are also being expected to be a more generic business analysts, right? I think we discussed this before. So when accountants are expected to analyze the business, especially we expect them to better understand the business process in order to optimize them, and also analyzing the data captured by AIS to generate information that can be useful for managers' business decision making, right? So today's chapter 2, focuses on how can accountants understand and therefore optimize the business process. Okay, so that's the primary objective of this chapter, right? So basically, we are going to learn a systematic methodology, which is this BPMN, business process modeling notation for accountants or for business people in general, to understand and to analyze and eventually to optimize the business processes. So now we are going to separate this chapter into 2 sessions, today and Wednesday. So today we are going to learn the basic concepts of BPMN, and we are going to allocate half of today's time to do hands-on practice on how do we draw a BPMN diagram, okay? So a couple of definitions before we start today's discussion. So what do we mean by a business process? Okay, so if you look at the slide or your textbook, the business process is just a defined sequence of business activities, but it's not any sequence of activities, okay? So those activities have to be meaningful so that we can transform some resources, either tangible or intangible, into some meaningful outputs. All right. For example, some products or service. So if you think about a manufacturing firm, then a business process can be a manufacturing process where the raw materials are purchased, and then the firm converts the raw material into the final output and sell it to the customer. Or if you think of any retail companies, the business process can be purchasing some inventories, right, and then sell to customers to generate revenue. So this is called a business process. And a business analysis is simply a process or a task to analyze and also assess this business process, because any business process is not perfect, right? Like the real world can be really complex. So we need people who have the ability to analyze any business process to identify like potential areas to improve so that the efficiency or effectiveness of the process can be enhanced. So that is that process or that activity is called business analysis. So in order for us to analyze a business, we have to have a way to represent the process, right? Because for example, we have to have some kind of common language that we speak so that we can communicate and then identify collaboration. So in a similar way, if we want to analyze business, we have to have some kind of agreed upon representations to show that this is how we illustrate or how we show a business process, so that different people looking at the same representation will know that, okay, this is how a process looks like. So this is called a business model, right? So it's basically a representation of the process. But we also want to document this representation, right? So it's a little bit like we have the language, and then we document our language into like textbooks, right? So that we have that knowledge. So similarly, we want to document this business model for the purposes of communication and also transmission. So any questions or concerns or about the definitions? Okay, so those should be like very basic, right? So now, why do we have to learn about business model and business process documentation? Okay, so first of all, it is actually required by accounting standards. So if you learned about financial accounting, I think you must have heard about this Sarbanes-Oxley Act in 2002, right? So this act was initiated after the Enron scandal. So as part of this act, the SEC requires the public companies to do a better and more detailed documentation of their business process. Why? This is because the managers, they are required to look at this business process documentation and make an assessment of whether this process has good internal control, especially the processes that are related to financial reporting procedure. So this is by regulation. Firms, they have to do a good documentation of the business process. And not only for managers, auditors, external auditors, they also need to make an independent assessment of the manager's own assessment. So I'll give you an example. Let's say I am Starbucks, okay? I'm the manager, and I look at the business process documentation, and I say that based on our evaluation, the business process as well as the internal control over the processes related to financial reporting is effective. And then we need an external auditor, for example, KPMG, to come in and validate my assertion, right? So for example, KPMG can say, we looked at the business documentation and we look at the manager's assessment, and we agree with the management that yes, the process is effective. So regarding the manager's role in looking at this business process, it is under the SOX 302 section. If you are interested, you can look it up. And for the external auditor's role, it is covered under SOX 404 section. So when you get into your public accounting career, I think you are going to get in touch with a lot of these concepts. Okay, so that is to say, by the requirement of the standards, we need to, like businesses, they need to have good documentation of the business. So besides the requirement from the standards, what other benefits can we get from business process documentation? So as I said, if we have a common way to represent a business process and we document it, actually this is a way to maintain your knowledge, right? So then you can use that documentation as a way to train new employees. So if you think about your internship experience, right, you go to a Big Four or like accounting firm, and then you ask your senior, okay, what should I do in this reconciliation task or this invoice processing task, right? So usually your senior will give you some maybe like written documents on how to do those things, or they may just tell you what to do, right? But if they have a very detailed documentation on how to do certain things, it's you can this kind of documentation can serve as employee training. And besides that, if we speak the same language in terms of how a business process looks like, this way of communication can also like benefit within enterprise communication and cross-enterprise communication, right? Because then we have a common language. So here, I think that because we have a afternoon class, right? So many of you are feeling very sleepy. So then let's have this discussion, okay? So imagine that you are a restaurant manager, and can you describe the process step by step for this process of customer ordering a dinner and eventually serving the customer dinner? So can you describe this process step by step? And I first greet the customer, you have them seated, you show them the menu, and then maybe you give them some water, ask them what to drink, right? And then after a while, maybe after 10 minutes, you come back to them and say, do you have anything in mind? And then you take the order, and then the order is sent to the chef, right? And then the chef start to cook. And after 30 minutes, your meal is served. And then you eat for an hour, and then you ask for the check, and then you pay, and then you leave. Right? So that's a general process. Okay, so so this process is very smooth, right? Assuming that nothing else would happen. But in reality, many things could make this process deviate, right? So can you give me some examples? One example I can give is that, okay, the customer decides to leave before the meal is served because he or she has waited for 30 minutes, but the customer is in a hurry, so he'll say, okay, never mind, forget about my meal, I'm not paying, and I'm leaving. Right? So this is one deviation from the normal. Okay, some facilities don't work, right? You should serve the customer ice cream because the customer ordered, but the machine broke down. Okay, that's okay. Labor shortage, yeah. So there can be 3 chefs working, but today one take a vacation, so you only have 2, right? So then you have extra time, waiting time, or certain chef cannot make certain type of meal. I don't know. Okay. All right. Yes.
Maybe their steak was dropped, so they sent it back. You have to
so the steak you said like a well done, right? But they give you medium well. Okay, that's not good, so they have to redo it or give the customer refund, right? A lot of things could happen, right? You have another comment? So this exercise basically says like if we want to describe a process, right? Especially when there are different scenarios, it is really difficult to use our language to properly describe, right? So the basic version that Mendel provided is simple enough. But if I were to directly transcribe what he just said into words, I would imagine there would be 200, 300 words, right? So that is to say it's not very efficient if we describe a process just using words, right? Not to mention that there are so many different scenarios in a business process. So can we find a better way to describe a business process or represent a business process, right? So that comes to a business model, which is this good representation of a business process. So if we are not purely using words, what else can we use, right? So then I think you already previewed this chapter. We actually use different shapes and a framework of how we combine these shapes together to represent the process. So if you use a map as an analogy, then you can say that, okay, the way we describe a business process using this business model method, right, like BPMN, is similar to how we use a map to describe a location. For example, if you want to use words to describe what New Jersey look like, I don't know how you want to do that. But if you use a map, right, it's pretty intuitive. You can show that this is the way you go from Newark to New Brunswick, and this is the train you can take, right? So business model or BPMN follows the same idea. We want to simplify things so that the business process will be intuitive to understand. So there are different types of business models. So the first one is called activity model, which is the chapter 2 is about. And the next chapter, which will start next week, is about the second type of business model, which is called a structure model. So the difference between the two is that the activity model concerns about the process from, let's say, A to B. From a customer ordering a meal to, at the end, the customer pay for the meal. Okay, so that you deal with this a sequence of activities that from beginning to end. Okay, so if you think about the map, it is a little bit similar to I ask you how to get from Newark to New Brunswick. Okay, so just remember this analogy. Structure model is a different way to do business model in a way that it gives you a holistic picture of what it looks like in this business in general. Okay, so in this customer ordering example, a structure model would give you information about, for example, what's the process of, let's say, the restaurant getting ingredients, or the restaurant hiring people, waitresses or chefs, and other elements of the business. Or if you think about the map, right, it will be a generic map for New Jersey as a whole. So that's like in general, the conceptual difference between activity model and structure model. So one is micro in terms of the sequential steps of getting from A to B, whereas the structure model that we'll talk about in next week is very macro, that looks at the entire business. Okay, so that's the difference. But so far, you just need to understand that, okay, an activity model considers how to get from A to B. And then next week, after you see what a structure model is, you will have a better understanding of what I mean by micro versus macro. Okay, so for now, you just have to understand there are two different types. And today we're talking about the micro type, the activity model. Okay. Any questions here? All right. Okay. So when it comes to activity models, we have different like subcategories. So what we are going to learn is this business process modeling and notation, or BPMN, right? So there are other types, for example, flowcharts, and so on and so forth. So I think that our textbook provides some description about flowchart in the appendix. So if you're interested, you can take a look at it. But for now, you don't have to, because the flowchart and the BPMN, they are very similar, but they have some differences in the way they represent certain activities. So if you don't want to get confused, you can just forget about flowchart for now. And also another thing is that some students ask me, is flowchart a very generic name for these modeling? In a sense, yes, because sometimes I just use these words interchangeably. But professionally, if you want to say this is the type of activity model you are doing, you just want to say BPMN instead of flowchart, because they are kind of a defined terms. But in daily life, you can just call them flowchart and people will understand. And I believe if you do auditing, the auditors do describe the kind of modeling diagram flowcharts, right? So it's a matter of naming or definition, but we care about like the essence of it, right? So as long as you understand the what BPMN how BPMN works. It doesn't matter what you call it, right? So we can just focus on what it is rather than how it's called. Okay. So why do we learn about BPMN in particular rather than other types of activity models? This is because this framework is easily understood by business people without a lot of IT background, which means it's accountant friendly. Okay, so we as accountants, if we look at it, we would understand the process. So there are some other information that you need to know, and I believe the quiz already covered it. Right? For example, this BPMN framework is managed or maintained by this organization called Object Management Group, which happens to be OMG. Right? So this is very easy to remember. So let's just get to the critical part of this class. So this is an example of what a BPMN looks like for a process where a customer check out, right? Like they already choose items from, let's say, a grocery store, and now it's time to pay. So based on this diagram, so I want volunteers to describe step by step of what this diagram tell us. So first of all, the customer go to the checkout place, the cashier, and put the items on the belt, right? And then the cashier will start scanning the items. And the cashier, after scanning everything, the cashier will say credit card or cash, right? And then no matter what payment method you use, eventually all these items will be back, and then the cashier will give you the card after you pay, and then that concludes the process, right? So this is a very simple process, and from here you can see that the BPMN is very intuitive to understand. You don't need like very high like technical background to understand, right? It's very lay people friendly. So here are some fundamental elements for a BPMN. So I think you already previewed the chapter, right? So these should come very easily. So for any process, we have to start and end by using these circles, right? So this is the circle shape represents an event. And the most basic usage is just to put it at the beginning and end. So for the end, we have to bold it. Okay? So that's just, there's no why. It is just the framework. It's a little bit like we have a common language that we agreed on that let's just use this shape to mean that thing. It's a little bit like how language works, right? So we just use these to represent the beginning and end. And any process needs to have these two elements. And for this event shape, we generally do not put annotation within the shape. We put it outside, okay? So we usually, if you want to add information, you add the annotation outside. We also use a rounded rectangle to represent an activity or a task. So for this kind of shape, we can add annotation within the shape. And usually the annotation is a very short verb phrase, right? So for example, here the description is scan the item and identify payment method. So this is the way to describe activity or a task. And here, this diamond shape is called a gateway. So a gateway just gives you different scenarios, right? So here we have two scenarios, but in other processes, you may have multiple scenarios. And later we're going to talk about different types of gateway. And these arrows are called a sequence flow. So here the direction of the arrow shows the way in which the process flows, right? So you read in the direction of the arrow, right? So from here, we know that we have to read from left to right, right? And for the sequence flow, we can also add annotation like on the arrow, okay? And so for gateway, gateway is similar to the event shape that we do not add annotation within, but we add outside, right? So for example, the annotation for the gateway is like the type of payment method. So we add this annotation outside. So this is true for both the event and the gateway, but for activity and sequence flows, the description can go inside. Okay, so I think that it's a little bit like boring, right? Like if we just look at these shapes. So yeah, question. So basically, like an activity, just any action. Like for example, you bag in item or you scan the item, you accept the payment. So anything that is like some kind of action or a task, then that goes to the rectangle. But sometimes it can get a little bit blurry, right? For example, let's say the starting event, right? So you can actually add another activity here to say start and then activity customer presents the item, right? Because that can be an action. So to your point, I think it also makes sense to me that you can remove this bagging item rectangle and add an annotation to the ending event, right? Say ending like bag items and end the process. So that would also work. Yeah. So that is to say that actually there's no let's say crystal clear rules as to what goes into which shape. Okay. So as long as it is clear to the user, right? So for example, you can do a flow chart or BPM diagram and you show it to me. If I can describe what that is, then it is okay. And you will notice that later, like for example, this shape, scan items and identify payment method. This can be two activities, right? Instead of one. So you can also break this down into two. And then you have the question of, okay, how granular is the activity? Right? That is impossible to answer question because you can go like very detailed, right? Because you can say, first I put the things on the belt and then I take one item out, right? Then that is too complicated. So it depends on your preference. So if you want to show more details, then you can break one, let's say, multi-step activity down into their granular steps, or you can just condense them. So either way works. So it depends on your preference. Okay, so our objective is to make people understand, right? Because we are not like doing like high-tech things. Our purpose is to communicate, like the agreed upon rules that we establish. So there's no particular reason. So this is the way, let's say we start with a gateway and we have to close it. So that's the conceptual reason, but there's no other reason to support it other than this is the way that the framework designers design. Okay. So it's a little bit like, why do we have to bold the ending circle to show that this ends? Because it can be other types of shape, right? So this is just like, as I said, it's a framework that people generally agreed upon. And if you design a diagram and others design a diagram for the same process, people would generally understand. So these are just like a set of rules. It's like a grammar. Okay. So if you think of these as grammar, then that basically, I hope that clarifies. So when you close or when you merge different scenarios, generally you like I would not put any annotation, right? Unless some circumstances made you think, okay, you have to clarify certain things. But for the opening gateway or the branching gateway, usually you want to put some annotation, but it totally depends on you, the designer. If you think that that's the way to make it useful or clear to the to other users, then you do it. Okay. I was just talking about flowchart versus BPMN, right? So if you look at the appendix, actually they have a lot in common. They just have a little bit differences in sometimes the way they show certain shapes. So if you are interested, you can look at it. But let's say colloquially in daily life, you would just say that I'm doing flow charting. But if you want to be very specific and be very technical, you want to say that you are learning BPMN. But as I said, in your work, people would just say that we're doing flow charting. It's okay. They are just different ways people call it. But like technically, these are two different concepts with some overlap. Okay, but in daily life, people just mix these terms together. Sorry. Oh, it's okay. That's a very good question. Actually, like when people ask me, okay, what do we teach in AIS? I just say, well, we start with flow charting, and then because if you say we start with BPMN, they'll say, what is BPMN, right? But flow charting, everyone understands. Okay, so colloquially, like in daily life, people just mix them. But technically, these are two different things with some overlap. Okay, so I think that clarifies. So here, I think because later we want to save the files for the next class. So if you are having your personal computer, that's great. You can do it on your own computer because this is like a web based application. It doesn't require any like particular type of system, right? So you just need to go to this link. It is called BPMN.io. But if you are using the lab computer, it's also fine. You just have to find a way to save the file later on. So if you have a USB drive, that's great. You can copy that, or you can log into your email, right? So that you can email yourself the file, because next time we're gonna use it. So while you are getting ready, I just want to mention that. So this BPMN.io, we're gonna use it for your group project. Okay. So for your group project, the first part will be you analyze a business process and then you draw the process, okay, using BPMN.io. So that's going to be the task. So you need to grasp this skill, okay, here. But the BPMN.io will not appear on your quiz or assignments, okay? So you're not going to get this in your Canvas McGraw-Hill. We only require this in your group project, which is in late October. Okay, so that's when you're gonna need this. So you can save all the files that you create in today's and Wednesday's class, so that maybe you are gonna use it for your group project. Okay, so once we're here, we click Try Online. Okay, and then we click Create. So create means that we are creating a blank diagram. Okay. So now we are in this interface. Okay. So by default, there is a starting event circle. Right. So that means that from here we can create our BPMN diagram. So the way it works is that, for example, if we want to add any activity behind the start, you can just click this circle, right, and then it will show different options. So if I want to add activity, I click this task rectangle, and then this task will be appended to the starting event. Okay. So by default, it gives you the option to add annotation, right? So you can add different things. So for example, I'm just making it up. So that's how you can do it, and then you can like try to choose different shapes. For example, let's say we append the gateway, right? So I haven't talked about different types of gateways, but we can get to that soon. So here, the X shape within the gateway means an exclusive gateway. So I will go to that part soon. And then you can just get yourself familiar with the tool. And if you want to redo, I think you just need to click this undo last change, and then you can go back. If you want to delete certain things, I think you just click it and then use this remove button, and then that shape is gone. Okay, so you can just play around with this a little bit to get yourself familiar with it, because we're gonna do some exercise on this platform. Okay, so before we go to the in-class practice, let me mention the different types of gateways. So to answer Brandon's question, right? Like, why do we always have to have a second gateway to close it? Right? This is like a grammar or agreed upon rule that the gateways need to appear in pairs to show the beginning and ending of these scenarios. So we have three types of gateways. By default, the diamond shape without anything inside is called an exclusive gateway. And if you want to be more specific, you can add an X sign within the diamond. So the exclusive gateway says that among the scenarios offered, you can only take one path. Okay, so only one. And the inclusive gateway is the second one, which has a circle inside. So by its name and by what the circle means, right? It means that it can show you can take one or more paths. So let me illustrate. So this is exclusive gateway, right? By default. So for example, in this scenario, you can either reserve the flights or you reserve the rental car, but you cannot do both at the same time. So that's an exclusive gateway. Whereas if you take the inclusive gateway, you can do either flights by itself or just reserving a rental car by itself, or you can do both at the same time. Okay. So this happens when you have, let's say, you are traveling to a place where you cannot, you need to drive, right? So you may at the same time book the flight and book a rental car when you arrive, right? So that you can use the car. So that's exclusive versus inclusive. And lastly, we also have a type of gateway called parallel. So a parallel gateway has a plus sign in the middle. So the parallel means that, okay, by its name, right, you can take all these paths at the same time. And you only have that option. You have to take all these paths. So that is to say, when you plan a trip, you have to, at the same time, reserve a hotel and book a flight and reserve a rental car. I think this happens when we do like family travel to some place that requires driving, right? You have to do all these. So it totally depends on the underlying process that you are dealing with, right? And then you choose the appropriate type of gateway. So now let's do some practice. So if you haven't gotten the handout that I give you, you can come to me and get one copy. And we're going to use the handout for today and also for Wednesday. Okay. So this one is shown in your handout. Basically, this is a description of a customer ordering process. So I think that most of you experience this kind of situation, right? So we use this as an example. So I will give you some time to read this case. And the first practice will be, let's just assume in a very simple world, right? Let's do not introduce complexity. And if in that kind of mindset, can we do a BPMN based on that description? And I want a volunteer to come on stage to show it. And I will give instructions while you do it, okay? So this way we have more participation. So I'll first give you some time to read. I think the first practice, I will illustrate, okay? But the second one, I need a volunteer. The first one, I can show some basics, and then you can apply like the basics to the new scenario. So the first practice will be identifying the starting, ending events, and also the tasks that the barista performs, right? So we're going to do this diagram from the barista's point of view. Okay, so you have to be mindful of that. Is it okay that we return to here and start doing the diagramming? Okay. So since we have a starting event, right? Let's say we want to add more information to the starting. Let's say we want to add an annotation to say that this is what triggered the process. Okay, so what would that annotation be? So first, this is the way to add annotation. Okay, so if you click this circle, then you have the option to choose a dotted sign with a square bracket. So this is the way to add a text annotation. So if we click on it, then this is the where we can add annotation. So what will be your suggestion on what kind of annotation to add here? The thing that prompt this process. Okay, and so customer go through the drive-through lane and they have to do something, right? Because if they just pass by, then there's no process. Yeah, place order, right? So let's say customer place an order. Okay, so I'm just gonna put it here. The starting event, and we have annotation. This is why we are starting the event. Okay. So after the customer places an order, what will be the next step? Here we're gonna add a task or activity, right? So I'm just gonna do here. Let's say record the order. I will just do prepare order. Okay. So here, if you want, you can also separate this into two. You can say, because the description says the barista prepares coffee first, right? And then muffin. So if you want to be very specific, you can also do prepare coffee and then prepare muffin. So, but here I am saving some space here. So I'll just say prepare order. And if you want, maybe you can do like coffee in parentheses and muffin. All right, so what's next? Just look at the description, right? So they said, then after the barista prepared the order, the barista is gonna give the order to the customer, right? So, but in reality, it could be different, right? But let's just believe that that's the case. Then it's gonna be give the order. The customer. Okay, so that's gonna be the payment process, right? So what will be the next? Like after we give the order to the customer, and then so let's say before we open the exclusive gateway, let's say we have an activity to ask for payment method, right? So let's call it because I think we have a slide showing that there is a way, there's a step that is called identify payment method, right? So let's just say we use the same wording here that we want to identify payment method. Okay. And then that's the gateway part, right? So then we add an exclusive gateway. So here we choose this diamond shape. So by default, the gateway will be exclusive. Okay. So if we want to add some annotation here, just like what the slide show here, let's also put like payment method in question mark, right, to be very descriptive. So I'm adding annotation to the gateway. So you can also do the same. So I'll just do payment method and a question mark. So how many options do the customers have to pay? 3, right? So we have 3 options. So for each scenario, we are gonna use an activity shape. So here I will just put 3. So this is 1, and I want to put it a little bit up. So you can drag and drop these shapes to make it looks nicer. Right, and then to add another scenario, you go back to the gateway again, and then you click the other one, and then you have 2 activities connected to the gateway. Then we need to do a third one. So I want to make it look better, so I want to adjust it. in a way that they look nice. Okay. So then I can just label one scenario as cash, and second one, let's call it credit card. Last one, let's say gift card. So now, as a rule of thumb, right, we also need a closing or merging gateway after these scenarios. So to do that, you can select any of these scenario and just add a gateway, and you can put it in the center here. And then you just have to connect these shapes. So to do that, you can, for example, I want to connect this credit card scenario to the merging gateway. I just have to select this arrow, right? And then I connect to here, and I connect to here. So then that closes the gateway. Okay, so after the payment, what is the process? Let's say after this process, after identifying the payment method, what's the next step? Yes. Return the card. Okay. And I think there's also one step that says record the payment, right? This customer has the option to pay, and then the barista recorded the payment and return. So you can also group them together. So here you can either just use one rectangle shape to say record the payment and return the card or changes, right? But here, let me just put them as separate tasks. So I would say record the payment. Yeah, so here this gets to like how detailed is necessary, right? So if you want to be more detailed, like what I'm doing here, you can use 2 separate activities. But if you want to be simplified, you can put them together. So I do payment, return the card, and the receipt. Okay, so let's go return. So here, because the customer has an option to pay cash, right? So if they pay cash, then we're gonna return changes, right? Not card. So here, if you want to be more precise, then let's do changes and receipt. Are there more activities after that? Or should we end this process? I think we can end this process, right? So then we can just add this ending shape here. So that concludes the whole process. So if we look at the whole thing, looks like this, and you can adjust how it looks like to make it more readable. Okay, so this is my chart. I will walk around and to see how you guys are doing, and if you have any suggestions on how we can improve the chart, you can also raise your hand. We can discuss. Okay, so I think this one is very basic, right? And I think this platform is very easy to use. So as long as you get familiar with it, you can just do all kinds of dragging and dropping. Okay, so that is our first practice. So I think after you actually do this diagram, you feel that you kind of understand these shapes better, right? Okay, so if we don't have other questions, we are going to introduce some other concepts for us to do more complicated modeling. So in real world business, right? We are, let's say in Starbucks, we are just not dealing with barista. We also have cashier or other employees, right? So in my experience, right, usually when I go to Starbucks, the cashier will take my order. Like if I don't order online, okay? And then the cashier will deliver this order to, give the information to the barista, and the barista will prepare it and give me my items. And then the cashier will accept the payment and give me the receipt. So that is to say, within this process, we actually have different individuals. So if we just consider the side of Starbucks, right? So Starbucks is this organization, and there are different employees with different responsibilities. So like I said, the barista can maybe in most cases, right? If they have a very clear separation of roles, then the barista will just take care of the preparation and delivery, whereas the cashier will handle the monetary or transaction part, right? So then if that's the case, which is like mostly happening in the real world business, we need more advanced symbols to represent such case. So that comes to the pools and lanes, right? And this symbol is very intuitive because you can just consider an organization, for example, Starbucks as a pool, and the individuals, for example, different employees with different roles, or departments with different functionalities as swim lanes, right? So the swim lanes, they divide the pool into different sections so that different section represents these individuals or departments that have different responsibilities. So if we do that, and we can somehow like change where these activities or ending, starting shapes locate in the swim lane to show who is responsible for what activity, right? So in this example here, it's showing that, let's say, an individual represented by swim lane is responsible for activity 1, 2, and 3. But the second employee, represented by the second swim lane, is responsible for initiating and ending the process, but also taking care of the fourth activity. Okay, so this is how we can use this swim lane and pools to represent this more complicated situation. So now we have the second practice, which is also on your handout. So let's assume, as I mentioned, that let's say the barista is only responsible for 2 activities. Okay, so let's say barista only prepares the order and also gives the order to the customer. But other activities will be handled by the cashier, including taking the order, accept payment, and prepare the receipt. So now under this new scenario, I want you to utilize a pool and a swim lane to revise the diagram. Okay, so I will just show you how to add a swim lane, and then you guys take from there, and I will ask for volunteers. So I'm gonna, yes, question? Oh, sorry, the N here. I can make it bigger. Is it clear?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Okay, so before we get to that, I will show you how to save this file because we may use it later, okay? So you can double check if it's correct. If so, you can download it. So you can click this download button at the very bottom, right? Shows like an arrow down. So if you click that, this file is gonna be saved in a format that is called BPMN. Okay, so that is to say, like this kind of file cannot be opened directly unless you use this website. Okay, so for example, let me close this, and this is the file I just downloaded. Okay, this diagram.bpmn. So if I want to open it, I go to the same website and then I try online. And then instead of create, I will do open because I am opening an existing file. Okay. And then I choose the file that I just downloaded and I open. So then you get to the exact same diagram that you just created, and you can continue editing or revising it. So this is, I suggest that you save this file in this way. And if you are using the lab computer, you can email yourself that file so that that doesn't get lost. So another way to save this file, which I do not recommend, is to save it as an image, because otherwise it's like an image based. So if you open it, it's like a little bit like PDF format. That means you cannot edit it. But if you want to print it out, that's a good option. But if you want to recycle it, just download it as the BPMN file. Okay. So that's about saving the file. And so for the second practice, I'm just going to create a new file, okay, so that we have a clean start. So any questions so far before I show the swim lanes? Okay. So now you can look at what I do here on the screen. So this is how you can get a swim lane into the chart. So here you identify the swim lane logo, right? It is this rectangle with a line in between. So you click it, you drag and drop to the middle. Okay, so now you have a swim lane with a starting point here. So one thing to note is that so when we have this pools and swim lane, they are still within the same process. Okay, so that is to say we still need one starting and one ending. So okay, I won't confuse you, but in next class we're going to look at the interactions between organizations. But now, like we just need one starting. Okay, so if you want to type Starbucks as an organization name, you just need to double click this blank space between the two lines, and then you can edit. For example, I can say Starbucks. And you can make it bigger because later you're gonna draw a lot of things inside. Okay, so that's a pool. And how are you going to add a swim lane? So here we only have two lanes, right? Which means we can choose the thing in the middle here, divide into two lanes. So I can click on it, and then the pool will be separated into two lanes. Okay. And then you can give each lane a name. So for example, I can say, I'm just making it bigger. Let's say the lane at the top is cashier. So I can double click this area very close to the left. I double click this area, and then you have an area to put the name. So I can say this is cashier. And then I can give a name to the lane on the lower end, and I can say barista. Okay. So now we have a pool and swim lane, right? So now with the idea that you can allocate these activities in different lanes to show responsibility, I want a volunteer to revise the diagram based on. I bet you're pardon if I mispronounce your name or I mix your name with different places, or please forgive me. And I think I need another month or so to remember all the names. All right, so this is done by Solera. Do you guys have any comments or agreement or disagreement? So if you have very similar diagram as Solera, you can raise your hand. Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Yay, I think most of you, right? That's great. So for those of you who have any differences, like what are the differences? Maybe we can discuss. Because there's, as I said, right, there are different ways to do the same thing. So then fix this here. It's gonna be here. So it looks a little bit messy, but the idea is there. So we want to do identify payment. Third. Okay, so what else? Harsh, you have a comment? Or you have the same comment? I was walking around. I think most of you did very similar chart, right? So this is really good. And most of you get the idea of like separating rows. So last point to emphasize. So here, when we do this within pool process flow, these sequence flows, they are like normal, right? They are the solid lines. And also within the same pool, we have one starting and one ending, right? So, and if you think of a river, right, it goes starting from here and it gets consumed all the way to the end, right? So I emphasize this because in the next class and also as you preview, right, there's a difference when you have interactions between pools. So that will be different, but we'll discuss next time. So that's it for today. And one note before you go, our assignment for this chapter will be available at 9 p.m. tonight, but you do not have to start right now. You can wait until Wednesday. But I just leave it there so that if some of you feel comfortable starting, you can start, right? But you don't have to. So that's the only note. Okay, see you next time.